I still remember the whisper, soft, trembling, almost drowned by the ticking clock. "Mom, he'll kill me for the $6 million insurance." Those words pierced through me like a shard of glass, cutting deeper than any wound I've ever known. That night, everything I thought I knew about love, family, and trust crumbled into dust. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Elena, and at 72 years old, I thought I had seen everything life could throw at me. I was wrong, dead wrong. My days had become living nightmares, masked as routines in my modest West Side apartment in Chicago. The city's cold wind crept through cracked windows like a ghost, carrying with it the scent of stale coffee and the antiseptic smell that seemed to cling to everything in my life. Every morning, I'd shuffle through the same ritual. Pour lukewarm coffee into a chipped mug that read, "World's Best Mom." A cruel joke now. Stare out at the gray skyline, watching other families start their days with purpose while mine felt like it was built on quicksand. The clockwork meetings with my daughter's husband were cold, merciless. Their smiles were empty, their eyes passing over me like I was furniture they'd grown tired of looking at. That particular evening, after the third canceled dinner in a row, I heard something that would haunt my dreams forever. My daughter's breath was hitching behind her locked bedroom door. She was whispering into her phone, and her words fell like stones into still water. "Mom, he'll kill me for the $6 million insurance." Her fear was a weight so heavy it felt like gravity itself had reversed. I clutched an old photograph, a faded picture of her laughing in the summer sun when she was 7, innocence untouched by the poison that would later seep into our lives. The scent of lilacs from my neighbor's garden drifted through the cracked window, contrasting with the bitter taste of betrayal in my mouth. I wondered, staring at that photo until my eyes blurred, where did we go so wrong? My story wasn't born in fear. No, it was carved through decades of sacrifice, each cut deliberate, each wound accepted with the blind faith that love would somehow make it all worthwhile. From when my daughter Carmen was a tiny bundle in my arms in our cramped Queens apartment, to her dream wedding in an upscale Chicago hotel overlooking Lake Michigan, I gave everything, my savings, my time, my very soul. Let me paint you the picture of those early years. Carmen was my miracle baby, born when I was 38 and had almost given up hope. Her father left when she was 3, disappeared into the night like smoke, leaving behind only unpaid bills and broken promises. I worked double shifts at the diner, my hands cracked from washing dishes, my feet swollen from standing 14 hours a day. But Carmen was my sunshine. She'd wait for me after school with crayon drawings of our little family, just her and me, holding hands under a rainbow. "When I grow up, Mama," she'd say, climbing into my lap despite my uniform smelling like grease and exhaustion, "I'm going to buy you a castle." I believed her. God help me, I believed every word. I moved us to Chicago when Carmen was 16, chasing better opportunities, better schools. The transition was brutal. New city, new job, new struggles. I cleaned office buildings downtown, starting at midnight and finishing at dawn so I could be home when Carmen woke up. My back ached constantly, my knees screamed with arthritis, but I pushed through, because that's what mothers do. Carmen blossomed in Chicago. She got into Northwestern on a partial scholarship. I covered the rest by taking out loans against everything I owned. She studied business and finance, and I was so proud I could burst. "You're going to be somebody," I'd tell her, pressing my worn hands against her cheeks. "You're going to have everything I never could." She met Derek during her senior year. Tall, handsome, from a wealthy family in Lincoln Park. He drove a BMW and wore suits that cost more than I made in a month. When Carmen brought him home for the first time, I noticed how his eyes swept over our small apartment, cataloging every crack in the wall, every secondhand piece of furniture. "So, you're the famous Elena," he said, shaking my hand with a grip just a little too firm. "Carmen talks about you constantly." Something in his tone made my skin crawl, but Carmen was glowing. She loved him, and I told myself that was all that mattered. The wedding was everything Carmen had dreamed of. Derek's parents insisted on paying for most of it, which should have been a blessing except for how they made sure I knew my place. "We're so grateful you could make it," Derek's mother said to me at the reception, as if I were a distant relative instead of the mother of the bride. I wore the only dress I could afford from a discount store, and I felt invisible among Derek's family and their designer gowns and tailored suits. But when I walked Carmen down the aisle, her father still nowhere to be found, and saw her face radiant with happiness, I thought maybe, just maybe, all the sacrifice had been worth it. That was 5 years ago. 5 years of watching my daughter slowly disappear. It started small. Carmen would cancel our weekly dinches, claiming Derek needed her for some business function. She'd call less frequently, and when she did, her voice sounded strained. "Careful. I can't talk long, Mom. Derek's waiting." Derek got a job at an investment firm downtown, making what Carmen described as serious money. They bought a house in Lincoln Park, not far from his parents. The mortgage payments were enormous, but Derek assured everyone he had it under control through his stock investments. "He's brilliant with money, Mom," Carmen told me during one of our rare conversations. "He's already made us $500,000 in the stock market this year alone." I should have been happy for them. Instead, I felt this growing distance, like watching my daughter slip away piece by piece. When they invited me for Sunday dinners, Derek would dominate the conversation, talking about his latest cryptocurrency investments or his plans to diversify into international markets. "Bitcoin is the future, Elena," he'd say, not bothering to look at me while he cut his steak. "I've already made Carmen and me a small fortune trading it. Of course, you probably don't understand these things." The dismissal in his voice was clear, but Carmen would just smile tightly and change the subject. I started to notice other things too, how Carmen would flinch when Derek raised his voice, how she'd stopped wearing the jewelry I'd given her over the years, how she seemed to shrink in on herself whenever he was around. The first time Carmen asked me for money, I was surprised. Derek was doing so well after all. "It's just temporary, Mom. Cash flow issues. You know how investments can be." I gave her $3,000, money I'd been saving for emergencies. Then it happened again 2 months later. Then again. Each time the amounts got larger, and Carmen's explanations got vaguer. "Derek's putting together a major deal," she'd say. "He just needs bridge financing until his assets become liquid." I never saw that money again, but I didn't ask questions because Carmen seemed so anxious whenever we talked about finances. Derek, meanwhile, continued to live lavishly, driving his BMW, eating at expensive restaurants, talking about his diversified investment portfolio worth millions. The requests for money became more frequent. 5,000 here, 8,000 there. I emptied my savings account, then my retirement fund. When Carmen asked for 15,000 to help cover what Derek called temporary liquidity issues with his stock positions, I had to take out a second mortgage on my apartment. "You're such a blessing, Mom," Carmen said, tears in her eyes when I handed her the check. "Derek says once his Bitcoin investments mature, he'll pay you back with interest." But Derek never acknowledged the money I gave them. He'd shake my hand at family gatherings and talk about his latest business triumphs, as if I hadn't just funded his lifestyle. The contradiction ate at me like acid. During this time, Derek started making subtle digs about my intelligence, my background, my worth. At Carmen's birthday dinner, he told a story about teaching her about sophisticated investment strategies. "Elena, you should learn about this stuff," he said, laughing. "Maybe you could make your cleaning money work harder for you." Carmen laughed too, but I saw the apology in her eyes. That laugh cut deeper than Derek's words ever could. I began to realize that my daughter was trapped in something I didn't fully understand. She'd call me late at night sometimes, her voice hushed and scared. "Mom, I can't talk long. Derek's in the shower." "Carmen, what's wrong?" "Nothing. Everything's fine. I miss you." But everything wasn't fine. I could hear it in her breathing, see it in the way she jumped whenever Derek entered a room. My daughter, who used to be fearless, had become a shadow of herself. The breaking point came on a humid July evening. Derek had called earlier, his voice smooth as silk, asking for another short-term loan. "Carmen's got her heart set on this vacation to Europe," he explained. "And my money's tied up in a major stock deal that'll pay off huge in a few months. 20,000 should cover it." $20,000. The number echoed in my head as I walked Carmen's neighborhood that evening, hoping to surprise her with homemade cookies like I used to when she was little. I wanted to see her smile, to remember what our relationship used to be. I let myself into their house with the spare key Carmen had given me months earlier. The house was dark except for a light upstairs. I called out but got no response. That's when I heard voices. Derek on the phone in his study, the door partially open. "The old lady will give us whatever we ask for," he was saying, his voice cold and calculating. "She's completely under Carmen's thumb. We've already gotten, 60,000 from her? And she keeps borrowing against that crappy apartment to give us more." My blood turned to ice. "Carmen doesn't even know half of what I've been taking," Derek continued. "She thinks I'm some investment genius, but most of that money goes straight to paying off my gambling debts. The insurance policy is the real prize, though. $6 million when something happens to Carmen. And with her depression getting worse, well, accidents happen. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Derek was talking about my daughter like she was a business transaction, a commodity to be liquidated. The beauty is, Elena will probably leave us everything she's got when she dies anyway. These old immigrants, they're so desperate to be accepted by their children's families. She'll keep giving until there's nothing left." I backed away from the door, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. I had to get out of there, had to think, had to figure out what to do. That's when I heard Carmen's footsteps on the stairs. She was crying softly, probably hadn't seen my car outside. I hid in the coat closet, feeling like a thief in my own daughter's house. Carmen went into the kitchen and called someone. Her voice was barely a whisper, but I could hear every word through the thin walls. "Mom, he'll kill me for the $6 million insurance," she said into the phone. "I found the policy tonight. I'm not the beneficiary, he is. And there's a clause. If I die by accident or suicide within the first 5 years, he gets everything. Mom, I think he's poisoning me. I've been so sick, so confused. The doctor says it's depression, but it started right after he took out this policy. My daughter was in danger, real danger. And I had been funding the very man who was planning to destroy her. I slipped out of the house like a ghost and drove home in a daze. Everything made terrible sense now. Derek's expensive lifestyle despite his tied-up investments. Carmen's deteriorating health and mental state. The constant requests for money that always seemed urgent, but never seemed to solve anything. I had been played like a piano, and my daughter might die because of my blindness. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with every document I had, bank statements, loan papers, receipts for all the money I'd given them over the years. The total was devastating, $87,000. Money I'd worked my entire life to save, gone to fund a man who was planning to murder my daughter. But understanding the problem was only the first step. I had to figure out what to do about it. The next morning, I called Carmen. My hand shook as I dialed her number. "Mom?" She sounded surprised to hear from me so early. "Carmen, I need to see you. Alone." There was a pause. "Derek's at work all day. You could come over around noon." When I arrived at their house, Carmen looked terrible. She'd lost weight. Her skin was pale and mottled, and her hands trembled when she poured coffee. This wasn't depression. This was systematic poisoning. "Carmen," I said, reaching across the table to take her hands. "I heard Derek on the phone last night." Her face went white. "What do you mean?" "I know about the insurance policy. I know he's not investing the money I've been giving you, and I think he's making you sick on purpose." Carmen started crying, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. "I've been so stupid, Mom, so blind. I thought he loved me, but he's been planning this from the beginning. The marriage, the house, even meeting me at Northwestern, it was all calculated." "What do you mean?" "I found papers in his desk. He'd been researching me for months before we met. My background, your financial situation, everything. He knew about Dad leaving, knew how close we are, knew you'd do anything for me. I was a mark, Mom, a target." The pieces fell into place like a jigsaw puzzle of horror. Derek hadn't fallen in love with Carmen. He'd selected her like she was a stock to invest in. A vulnerable young woman with a devoted mother who had some assets he could drain, and then the ultimate payoff when Carmen died, accidentally. "We have to go to the police," I said. Carmen shook her head frantically. With what proof? Derek's too smart for that. He's covered his tracks, made everything look legitimate. The insurance policy is legal. The money you gave us was gifts, and poisoning is almost impossible to prove unless you catch someone in the act. Then what do we do? I don't know, Mom. I'm trapped. If I try to leave him, he'll find a way to finish this quickly. If I stay, he'll keep poisoning me slowly until I'm too weak to fight back. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw a scared little girl who needed her mother to save her, just like when she used to wake up from nightmares and crawl into my bed, looking for protection from monsters that lived in shadows. Except this monster was real, and he was planning to kill my child for money. We're going to fight this, I told her, gripping her hands tighter. But we have to be smart about it. Smarter than him. Over the next 2 weeks, Carmen and I developed a plan. It was dangerous, maybe foolish, but it was the only chance we had to expose Derek and save her life. First, Carmen started documenting everything. She took photos of the pills Derek gave her for her depression, smuggling samples to a private lab for testing. She installed a hidden camera in Derek's study and recorded his phone calls. Most importantly, she started pretending the poisoning was working faster than Derek intended. He needs to think I'm getting sicker, she explained. Weak enough that an accident would seem believable. It was heartbreaking to watch Carmen pretend to deteriorate, but the evidence we gathered was devastating. The pills contained a cocktail of drugs designed to cause confusion, depression, and physical weakness. Derek's recorded phone calls revealed the entire conspiracy: his gambling debts, his plans for Carmen's death, and his contempt for both of us. Meanwhile, I played my part perfectly. I continued giving Derek money whenever he asked, playing the role of the naive old woman who trusted her son-in-law completely. Every dollar felt like a betrayal of my own daughter, but it was necessary to maintain the facade. "You're such a generous woman, Elena," Derek said to me at a family barbecue, his arm around Carmen's waist as she swayed weakly against him. "Carmen is so lucky to have a mother who supports our financial goals." I smiled and nodded, all while knowing that the hidden microphone in Carmen's purse was recording every word. The hardest part was watching Carmen suffer. Even though she was only pretending to be as sick as Derek believed, the stress of maintaining the deception was exhausting her. She lost more weight, developed dark circles under her eyes, and jumped at every unexpected sound. "I can't keep this up much longer, Mom," she told me during one of our secret meetings at a coffee shop downtown. "He's getting impatient. Yesterday he asked me about updating my will. Time was running out. We had evidence, but we needed to force Derek into a mistake. Something so obvious that even the best lawyer couldn't explain it away. That's when Carmen suggested something that made my blood run cold. We need to make him think I'm dying," she said. "Give him the opportunity to finish the job, but under controlled circumstances where we can catch him in the act." "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous." "Mom, it's the only way. We get him to try to poison me with something lethal while the police are watching. Attempted murder is a lot easier to prosecute than gradual poisoning." I hated the idea, but Carmen was right. We arranged for Carmen to collapse at home while wearing a wire. The plan was for Derek to try to finish her off in the ambulance or hospital, thinking she was already dying. Everything went wrong. Derek was smarter than we gave him credit for. When Carmen collapsed in their living room, clutching her chest and gasping for air, Derek didn't try to poison her further. Instead, he called 911 immediately, played the part of the devoted husband, and rode in the ambulance holding her hand and whispering what sounded like loving words. But Carmen was still wearing the wire, and what Derek whispered wasn't love. It was a threat. "If you think you can outsmart me, you're wrong," he hissed in her ear while the paramedics worked. "I know about the cameras, the recordings, all of it. Your crazy mother put you up to this, didn't she?" Carmen's eyes went wide with terror, but she couldn't respond without blowing our entire plan. "Here's what's going to happen," Derek continued, his voice so low the paramedics couldn't hear. "You're going to have a relapse tonight, a fatal one, and your pathetic mother is going to spend the rest of her miserable life knowing she got you killed." That night, Derek made his move. But instead of trying to poison Carmen in the hospital, he did something we never expected. He came after me. I was in my apartment, waiting for news about Carmen's condition, when I heard someone at the door. Through the peephole, I saw Derek standing in the hallway, holding what looked like flowers. "Elena, I brought these for you," he called out. "I know how worried you are about Carmen." Something in his voice raised every warning bell in my head. I didn't open the door. "Elena, please. I need to talk to you about Carmen's medical care. There are decisions that need to be made." I backed away from the door, my heart pounding. Derek knew. Somehow he'd figured out that Carmen and I were working together, and now he was here to silence the only witness who could testify against him. The lock started turning. Derek had a key. Carmen must have given him one months ago, back when I still trusted him. I ran to my bedroom and locked the door, then called 911 from my cell phone. But Derek was already inside the apartment, and he was moving toward my room with deliberate steps. "Elena, I know you can hear me," he called out, his voice now stripped of all pretense. "You and Carmen thought you were so clever, recording my phone calls, planting cameras. Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" He was right outside my door now. I could hear him breathing. "Here's the thing, Elena. Even if the police had enough evidence to charge me, which they don't, I'd still win. Because Carmen's going to have a tragic relapse tonight, and without her testimony, all you have are recordings that any decent lawyer can get thrown out of court." The door handle turned. I'd forgotten to check if Derek had keys to the individual rooms, too. He stepped into my bedroom, holding a syringe filled with clear liquid. His face was calm, almost peaceful, like he was discussing the weather instead of planning murder. "This won't hurt, Elena. Just a little insulin. Enough to send you into diabetic shock. At your age, with your medical history, no one will question it. Tragic that you couldn't handle the stress of your daughter's illness." "I'm not diabetic," I whispered. Derek smiled. "You are now. I've been adding small amounts of diabetes medication to your food whenever I visit. Your medical records will show a pattern of undiagnosed diabetes that finally caught up with you." He'd been planning my death for months, just like Carmen's. We weren't his first victims. We were part of a carefully orchestrated campaign that probably started years ago. "Why?" I asked, buying time and hoping the police would arrive soon. "Why not? You're old, useless, and you've served your purpose. Carmen will inherit whatever's left of your estate, and when she dies a few days later from grief and medical complications, I'll inherit everything. It's simple economics." Derek took a step closer, raising the syringe. That's when I heard the most beautiful sound in the world. Police sirens getting closer. Derek heard them too. His face twisted with rage, and he lunged forward with the syringe. I threw myself sideways, crashing into my dresser and sending picture frames flying. The syringe caught my arm, but only delivered a partial dose before Derek pulled it out and fled toward the window. The police found Derek trying to climb down the fire escape. The syringe was still in his hand, and my blood was on the needle. Even with the best lawyer in Chicago, he couldn't explain that away. Carmen recovered quickly once Derek was arrested, and she stopped taking the poisoned pills. The blood tests revealed enough evidence to charge Derek with attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and a dozen other crimes. The investigation also uncovered 2 previous wives who had died under suspicious circumstances, turning Derek from a local criminal into a serial killer. But the legal victory felt hollow. Carmen and I had survived, but we were both traumatized by how close we'd come to losing everything. The money I'd given Derek was gone, along with my retirement savings and the equity in my apartment. Carmen's health was damaged by months of poisoning, and she faced years of therapy to recover from the psychological abuse. The insurance company canceled Derek's policy immediately and launched their own investigation into insurance fraud. They also flagged Derek's gambling debts, which turned out to be even larger than we'd suspected. He owed money to some very dangerous people, and Carmen's insurance payout was meant to satisfy those debts as much as it was meant to make Derek rich. During the trial, more details emerged about Derek's systematic manipulation. He hadn't just targeted Carmen randomly. He'd spent months researching potential victims, looking for vulnerable women with devoted families and modest assets he could drain. Carmen fit the profile perfectly. Young, trusting, with an older mother who had some savings and would do anything to help her child. Derek's defense attorney tried to paint him as a man driven to desperate measures by gambling addiction, but the evidence of premeditation was overwhelming. The recorded phone calls, the hidden cameras, the systematic poisoning. It all pointed to a calculated predator who saw other people as resources to be exploited. Carmen testified against Derek, and I'll never forget the strength in her voice as she described what he'd done to both of us. She wasn't the broken young woman I'd found crying in her kitchen anymore. She was a survivor who refused to let Derek's evil define her future. Derek was sentenced to 45 years in prison. At his age, it was essentially a life sentence. He showed no remorse during sentencing, even smiling when the judge read the verdict. Right up until the end, he remained convinced that he was smarter than everyone else in the room. After the trial, Carmen and I had to rebuild our lives from scratch. She moved back into my apartment while we both recovered, and for the first time in years, we talked honestly about everything that had happened. "I'm sorry, Mom," Carmen said one evening as we sat together looking out at the Chicago skyline. "I should have seen what Derek was doing. I should have protected you. You were being abused too, Mija. Neither of us could have predicted how evil he really was. But the money you lost because of me can be replaced. You can't be. That's all that matters." And I meant it. The financial damage was severe. I had to sell my apartment and move into a smaller place, and my retirement was essentially gone. But Carmen was alive, Derek was in prison, and we had our relationship back. That was worth more than any amount of money. Carmen started therapy and gradually began to heal from the trauma. She couldn't go back to the house she'd shared with Derek. Too many terrible memories. So we found a small 2-bedroom apartment in a different neighborhood and became roommates again, just like when she was young. It took months for Carmen to stop jumping every time the phone rang or someone knocked on the door. Derek's psychological manipulation had been almost as devastating as the physical poisoning, and undoing that damage was a slow process. But gradually, I started to see glimpses of the daughter I remembered from before Derek entered our lives. She laughed more often, started cooking again, and began talking about her plans for the future. She even started dating again, though she was understandably cautious about trusting new people. Meanwhile, I had to figure out how to rebuild my own life at 72. The prospect of starting over at my age was terrifying, but I was determined not to become a burden on Carmen after everything we'd been through. I found work cleaning offices again, the same kind of job I'd had when Carmen was young. It was humbling to go backwards like that, but it was honest work that paid the bills. Carmen tried to convince me to let her support me, but I insisted on maintaining my independence. "Mom, you don't have to prove anything to anyone," she said. "I'm not proving anything to anyone except myself," I replied. "I need to know I can take care of myself." During this time, I also started attending a support group for families of crime victims. Hearing other people's stories helped me process what had happened to us and put our experience in perspective. Some of the other members had lost loved ones to violence, and their strength inspired me to focus on gratitude instead of bitterness. One woman in the group, Rosa, became a close friend. She was a widow who'd lost her husband to a financial scam, and she understood the particular shame that comes with being victimized by someone you trusted. Rosa had rebuilt her life after losing everything, and she became a mentor to me during the darkest moments of recovery. "The hardest part," Rosa told me, "is forgiving yourself for not seeing the signs earlier. But predators are experts at deception. That's what makes them dangerous." Rosa was right. Derek had been a professional manipulator, and Carmen and I weren't his first victims. Blaming ourselves for falling into his trap was like blaming a gazelle for being caught by a lion. The predator's success doesn't reflect the prey's intelligence or worth. As the first anniversary of Derek's arrest approached, Carmen and I decided to do something positive with our experience. We started volunteering with a local organization that helped domestic violence survivors, sharing our story with other families who were dealing with financial abuse and manipulation. It was difficult at first, reliving the trauma in front of strangers, but we discovered that talking about what happened had a healing power we hadn't expected. Every time we told our story, it helped us process it a little more, and we could see that our experience might prevent other families from falling into similar traps. "You saved my life, Mom," Carmen told me after one of our presentations. "If you hadn't been brave enough to investigate Derek, I'd be dead right now." "We saved each other," I replied. "That's what families do." And that was true. Carmen's courage in gathering evidence against Derek had been just as important as my determination to protect her. We'd worked together to expose a killer, and that teamwork had made us closer than we'd ever been before. 2 years after Derek's sentencing, Carmen met someone new. James was a teacher from the South Side, recently divorced with 2 young children. He was nothing like Derek, quiet, modest, with calloused hands from working on his house in his spare time. When Carmen first told me about him, I was terrified. "Mom, I can see the worry in your eyes," Carmen said. "But I'm not the same person I was before. I know what real manipulation looks like now, and James is nothing like that." She was right. James was patient with Carmen's trust issues, respectful of our close relationship, and transparent about his finances and intentions. When he asked Carmen to marry him after 18 months of dating, he also asked for my blessing, something Derek had never bothered to do. "I know Carmen has been through hell," James told me over coffee. "I'm not trying to replace what you mean to her, or to rush her into anything she's not ready for. I just want to be part of your family, if you'll have me." Carmen's second wedding was everything her first one wasn't. Small, intimate, focused on love rather than appearances. James's children were her flower girl and ring bearer, and I walked her down the aisle again, but this time with joy instead of apprehension. Derek tried to send Carmen a letter from prison around the time of her engagement. The prison authorities showed it to us first. It was full of manipulative language, fake apologies, and thinly veiled threats. Carmen decided not to read it, and I supported her choice. "He's still trying to control me," she said. "But I won't let him have that power anymore." The letter was destroyed unopened, and Carmen blocked all further communication from Derek. Whatever hold he'd once had over her was finally broken. Today, 3 years after Derek's conviction, Carmen and I have built a life that neither of us could have imagined during our darkest moments. Carmen is thriving in her marriage to James, and I've become a grandmother figure to his children. We live in separate apartments now, but we're closer than ever. I'm 75 years old, still working part-time, still independent. The money Derek stole from us is gone forever, but we've learned to live on less and value what really matters. Carmen has returned to school to study social work, inspired by our experience to help other abuse survivors. We've also become advocates for reform in insurance regulations, working with lawmakers to close loopholes that allowed Derek to take out such a large policy on Carmen's life. Our testimony helped pass legislation requiring additional safeguards for life insurance policies, potentially saving other families from similar schemes. But the most important change in our lives is harder to measure. We've learned to trust our instincts again. Where we once ignored red flags because we wanted to believe the best in people, we now pay attention to warning signs. We've become experts at spotting manipulation, and we're not afraid to set boundaries or say no. This skill has served us well in other areas of life. I've caught and reported 2 different scams targeting elderly people in my neighborhood. Carmen helped a coworker recognize signs of financial abuse in her own marriage. We've turned our painful experience into a tool for protecting ourselves and others. Sometimes I look back on those terrible months when Derek was slowly poisoning Carmen and draining my finances, and I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't overheard that phone call. Would Carmen have died? Would Derek have gotten away with murder? The possibilities still give me nightmares sometimes, but more often, I focus on what we accomplished together. 2 women, a 70-year-old cleaning lady and her frightened daughter, took down a serial predator and saved not just our own lives, but the lives of his future victims. We may not have been formally trained investigators, but we were motivated by love and determination, and that proved to be enough. Derek is now 53 years old and serving his sentence in a maximum security prison downstate. According to the victim advocate who keeps us informed, he's not eligible for parole for another 35 years. By that time, he'll be nearly 90, if he lives that long. Justice may be slow, but it was thorough in Derek's case. Carmen still struggles sometimes with anxiety and trust issues related to her abuse. She's been in therapy for 3 years, and she probably will be for years to come. But she's no longer the broken woman I found crying in her kitchen. She's a survivor who refused to let Derek's evil define her future, and I'm prouder of her than I could ever express. As for me, I've learned that strength doesn't always look the way we expect it to. I spent most of my life thinking I was weak because I'd been abandoned by Carmen's father, because I worked low-paying jobs, because I didn't have a college education or fancy clothes or impressive assets. Derek certainly saw me as weak, easy to manipulate and exploit. But when my daughter's life was in danger, I found reserves of courage and determination I never knew I possessed. I learned to investigate, to plan, to take risks, to fight back against someone much younger and more educated than myself. I discovered that a mother's love is one of the most powerful forces in the universe, capable of moving mountains when necessary. The financial cost of Derek's crimes was severe, and at my age, I'll never fully recover from it. But the personal cost would have been infinitely worse if he'd succeeded in his plans. Money can be replaced. Daughters cannot. These days, Carmen and I talk openly about everything that happened. We don't hide from the trauma or pretend it didn't affect us. Instead, we've integrated it into our story, using it as a source of strength and wisdom rather than shame. Do you ever regret moving to Chicago? Carmen asked me recently as we walked along Lake Michigan, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Never, I said without hesitation. If we'd stayed in New York, you never would have met Derek, but you also never would have met James. And we never would have learned how strong we really are, even considering everything we lost, especially considering everything we lost. We lost money, security, peace of mind, but we gained something more valuable. We gained the knowledge that we can survive anything as long as we have each other. Carmen smiled and took my arm as we continued walking. I love you, Mom. I love you too, Mija. Always. As we walked home that evening, I reflected on the journey that brought us to this moment. 5 years ago, I was a lonely widow living a small life, defined by my limitations and losses. I saw myself as someone who'd been left behind by history, too old and uneducated to matter in a modern world. Derek saw me the same way, a resource to be exploited, a mark to be conned. He never imagined that this 72-year-old cleaning lady might be capable of outmaneuvering him. His arrogance and contempt for older women became his downfall. Today, I know better. I may be 75, I may work with my hands, I may never have millions of dollars in assets or Bitcoin investments or stock portfolios, but I have something Derek never had and never understood: the unbreakable bond between a mother and daughter, forged in love and tested by fire. That bond gave us the strength to survive Derek's manipulation, expose his crimes, and rebuild our lives from the ashes of his betrayal. It continues to sustain us as we move forward, wiser and stronger than we were before. I think often about other families who might be dealing with similar situations. Financial abuse, especially of elderly people, is more common than most people realize. Predators like Derek are skilled at identifying vulnerable targets and slowly isolating them from potential sources of help. If my story sounds familiar to you, if you recognize elements of Derek's manipulation in your own life or the life of someone you love, please don't ignore those warning signs. Trust your instincts. Ask questions. Seek help from professionals who understand financial abuse and know how to investigate suspicious behavior. It's never too late to fight back, and you're never too old or too powerless to make a difference. Carmen and I are living proof of that truth. Most importantly, remember that you have value that extends far beyond your bank account or your assets. Predators like Derek want you to believe that your worth is measured in dollars, that love can be bought and sold like a commodity. But real love, the kind that exists between family members who truly care about each other, cannot be purchased or manipulated or destroyed by someone else's greed. Hold on to that truth. Let it guide you through whatever challenges you face. And remember that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are the ones who save the day. Have you ever lived through something similar, or do you know someone who has experienced financial manipulation within their family? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please share your stories, your insights, or your questions. Our experiences become more powerful when we share them with others who might benefit from our hard-won wisdom. And if this story touched your heart or opened your eyes to something you hadn't considered before, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your engagement helps ensure that stories like ours reach the people who most need to hear them. And sometimes sharing these truths can literally save lives. The work Carmen and I do now extends far beyond our weekly volunteer sessions. We've created what we call the Elena and Carmen Foundation, not a formal organization, just a network of people who've survived financial abuse and are committed to helping others recognize and escape similar situations. We speak at senior centers, community colleges, and women's shelters. Each presentation is different, tailored to the audience, but the core message remains the same. You are stronger than you know, smarter than your abuser believes, and deserving of love that doesn't come with a price tag. Last month, we received a letter from a woman named Patricia in Milwaukee. She'd watched our video online and recognized her own son-in-law's behavior and Derek's manipulation tactics. Because of our story, she was able to convince her daughter to seek help before the situation escalated to violence. "You saved my daughter's life," Patricia wrote. "She's safe now, and my grandchildren still have their mother. I can never repay you for giving me the courage to speak up." Letters like Patricia's remind me why we continue to share our story, even when it's painful to relive those memories. Every person who recognizes themselves in our experience, every family that escapes before it's too late, makes everything we went through worthwhile. The ripple effects of Derek's crimes extended far beyond Carmen and me. During the investigation, police discovered that Derek had been running similar schemes for nearly a decade. His first wife, Michelle, had died in what was ruled an accidental overdose. She was only 26, with a life insurance policy that made Derek a wealthy man. His second wife, Angela, had supposedly committed suicide after battling depression. She was 31, also insured for a substantial amount. By the time Derek met Carmen, he'd perfected his technique: research vulnerable women, court them quickly, isolate them from their support systems, take out large insurance policies, and then orchestrate their accidental deaths. The families of Michelle and Angela contacted us during Derek's trial. Both women had mothers who'd given their sons-in-law significant amounts of money before their daughters died. Both mothers had suspected something was wrong, but hadn't known how to prove it. "I knew he was evil," Michelle's mother, Barbara, told me through tears during one of our phone conversations. "But I was just a secretary from Detroit. No one listened to me. The police said Michelle's death was accidental. Case closed. I tried to get Angela to leave him," added Angela's mother, Dorothy. "But she was so scared of him by then. She said he'd threaten to kill her and make it look like suicide if she ever tried to divorce him. I thought she was being dramatic." Meeting these women was both heartbreaking and healing. We formed a bond forged in shared tragedy and mutual understanding. They couldn't save their daughters, but they could help us honor Michelle's and Angela's memories by ensuring Derek could never hurt another family. All three mothers testified at Derek's sentencing hearing. The judge listened carefully to our statements and acknowledged that our voices had been crucial in exposing Derek's true nature. Without our testimony, he might have received a lighter sentence or even escaped conviction entirely. "Mr. Derek Martinez," the judge said during sentencing, "you are a predator who targeted the most sacred relationships in our society, the bonds between mothers and daughters, husbands and wives. Your crimes represent a betrayal of trust so profound that it strikes at the very heart of what makes us human." Derek showed no emotion as he was led away in shackles. He never once looked at any of us during the entire proceedings. Even at the end, he couldn't acknowledge the humanity of his victims. The years since Derek's conviction have been a time of gradual healing and unexpected growth. Carmen has thrown herself into her social work studies with a passion that amazes me. She's specializing in trauma counseling and elder abuse prevention, turning her painful experience into professional expertise that will help countless others. "I want to be the advocate I wish I'd had," she told me when she changed her major. "Someone who understands what it feels like to be trapped and afraid, but who also knows that escape is possible." James has been incredibly supportive of Carmen's career goals, even though it means financial sacrifice while she's in school. He works extra hours to help pay for her tuition and never complains when she has to study late into the night. "Education is an investment in our future," he tells people who ask why he's supporting his wife's return to school. "Carmen is going to make a real difference in the world." His children, Sophia and Miguel, have accepted me as their grandmother with the openness that only children possess. Sophia, who's now 9, loves to help me cook traditional Mexican dishes that remind me of my own childhood. Miguel, 7 years old, insists that I teach him Spanish so he can talk to his new abuela properly. Abuela Elena, Sophia said to me last Sunday after church, Mom says you and Mama Carmen caught a bad man. Is that true? I looked at Carmen, unsure how much they knew about our story. She nodded, giving me permission to share an age-appropriate version of our experience. Yes, mija, I said, pulling Sophia onto my lap. Sometimes people pretend to be nice, but they're really trying to hurt others. Your mama and I had to be very brave to stop someone like that. Were you scared? Miguel asked, climbing up beside us. Very scared, I admitted. But sometimes being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you do what's right even when you are afraid. Like superheroes? Sophia asked. Exactly like superheroes, Carmen said, joining our conversation. Abuela Elena is the strongest person I know. These moments with the children help put our experience in perspective. Sophia and Miguel will grow up knowing that women can be strong, that families protect each other, and that good people fight against evil even when it's dangerous. My work schedule has evolved over the past few years. I still clean offices, but only part-time now. The rest of my time is devoted to what I call community vigilance, keeping an eye out for vulnerable neighbors who might be targeted by scams or abuse. Mrs. Chen, who lives 2 apartments down from me, was almost victimized by a contractor who wanted to do unnecessary repairs on her building's roof. I happened to be walking by when he was pressuring her to sign a contract, and something about his high-pressure tactics reminded me of Derek's behavior. Mrs. Chen, why don't you ask your son to look at this contract before you sign it? I suggested in Mandarin, which I'd been learning to communicate better with my neighbors. The contractor became angry at my interference, which only confirmed my suspicions. When Mrs. Chen's son examined the contract later, he discovered it was a complete scam designed to steal thousands of dollars from elderly residents. Elena, you saved me from losing my life savings, Mrs. Chen told me later. How did you know? Experience, I replied simply. Stories like Mrs. Chen's happen more often than people realize. Predators specifically target elderly people because they assume we're easier to manipulate and less likely to report crimes. But we're also more experienced than young people give us credit for, and we're often more willing to take risks to protect others because we have less to lose. I've helped expose 3 different scams in my neighborhood over the past 2 years. Each time, the pattern is the same. Someone targets vulnerable people with promises that seem too good to be true, uses high-pressure tactics to prevent their victims from thinking clearly, and tries to isolate them from family and friends who might ask inconvenient questions. These smaller victories feel significant because they represent prevention rather than reaction. Instead of waiting for crimes to happen and then seeking justice afterward, we're stopping predators before they can destroy lives. The emotional healing has been more complex than the practical aspects of rebuilding our lives. Carmen still has nightmares sometimes, and I occasionally catch her staring into space with that haunted look she had during the worst days with Derek. I keep thinking about how close we came, she confided to me recently during one of our evening walks. If you hadn't overheard that phone call, if Derek had been more careful, if any number of things had gone differently. But they didn't go differently, I reminded her. We survived. We fought back. We won. Did we win, though? Really? Derek is in prison, but Michelle and Angela are still dead. We saved ourselves, but we couldn't save them. This survivor's guilt has been one of the most difficult aspects of our recovery. Carmen struggles with the knowledge that Derek had killed before, and that our survival came too late to help his earlier victims. I understand her feelings because I share them, but I've also learned through therapy and our support group work that we can't save everyone, and attempting to carry that responsibility will destroy us. Our job is to use our experience to help the people we can reach, not to torture ourselves about the people we couldn't save. Mija, I told Carmen that night, Michelle and Angela are gone, and that's a tragedy that will never be okay. But because of them, because they were Derek's first victims, there was evidence that helped convict him. Their lives mattered, and their deaths weren't meaningless. How can you say that? Because their mothers had pieces of the puzzle that helped us see the complete picture of who Derek really was. Without their stories, the prosecution might not have been able to prove Derek was a serial killer instead of just an abuser who went too far once. Carmen considered this for a long moment. So, we were all working together, in a way. All the mothers and daughters. Exactly. We were a team, even though we never met until the trial. This perspective has helped both of us process the guilt and find meaning in our survival. We're not just lucky. We're responsible for using our luck to protect others. The community we've built through our advocacy work has become an extended family of sorts. Rosa, my friend from the crime victim support group, is now like a sister to me. We have coffee every Tuesday morning and share updates about our ongoing efforts to help other seniors avoid financial scams. Barbara and Dorothy, the mothers of Derek's earlier victims, stay in touch through phone calls and emails. We send each other articles about new scam tactics, share resources for other families dealing with similar situations, and provide emotional support when the anniversaries of difficult events roll around. Carmen has connected with other young women who survived abusive relationships, and she's become a mentor figure for several of them. One young woman, Maria, was dealing with a boyfriend who was systematically isolating her from her family and pressuring her to give him access to her bank accounts. "I kept making excuses for him," Maria told Carmen during one of their coffee meetings. "He was so charming most of the time, and when he got angry, he always apologized and promised to change." "That's exactly what Derek did to me," Carmen replied. "The cycle of abuse and apology is designed to keep you confused and hoping for things to get better. But what if I'm wrong? What if he really does love me and I'm just being paranoid?" "Maria, trust your instincts. You called me for a reason. Some part of you knows this isn't healthy, or you wouldn't be asking these questions." Carmen helped Maria develop a safety plan and connect with local domestic violence resources. Maria eventually left her abuser and moved back in with her family, just as Carmen had moved in with me during our recovery period. "You probably saved my life," Maria told Carmen at her college graduation ceremony 2 years later. "I was so lost, and you showed me a way out." These success stories remind us that our painful experience has been transformed into something positive. We didn't choose to become experts on financial abuse and manipulation, but since we survived it, we're uniquely qualified to help others recognize and escape similar situations. The legislative work we do has also yielded concrete results. The insurance reform bill we supported has been signed into law, requiring insurance companies to implement additional safeguards when large policies are taken out on spouses or family members. Under the new regulations, insurance companies must now conduct more thorough background checks on policyholders, require mandatory cooling-off periods for large policies, and flag situations where the beneficiary has a history of domestic violence or financial crimes. This legislation could prevent hundreds of deaths, the bill's sponsor told us during the signing ceremony. "Your courage in speaking out has literally saved lives. But perhaps the most meaningful change in our lives is harder to quantify: the deepening of our relationship with each other. Carmen and I were always close, but surviving Derek's manipulation together has created a bond that feels unbreakable. We talk every day, either by phone or in person. We make major decisions together. When Carmen was choosing between different graduate school programs, I was part of the decision-making process. When I was considering whether to move to a smaller apartment, Carmen helped me weigh the pros and cons. "People think it's weird that I talk to my mother about everything," Carmen told James one evening when he gently teased her about calling me 3 times in one day. "Why would that be weird?" he asked. "She's your best friend." And he's right. Carmen is my best friend too, and our friendship was forged in fire. We've seen each other at our worst, terrified, desperate, making mistakes. And we've seen each other at our best, brave, resourceful, unstoppable. This doesn't mean our relationship is perfect or that we don't sometimes disagree. Carmen thinks I work too hard for my age, and she worries about me living alone. I think she sometimes takes on too many volunteer commitments and doesn't give herself enough time to process her own trauma. But these are the kinds of disagreements that happen between people who love each other and want the best for each other. They're not the manipulative conflicts that Derek used to create between Carmen and me. "I used to be so jealous of your relationship with Carmen," Derek had told me at one family dinner early in their marriage. "She talks about you constantly. Sometimes I feel like I'm competing with you for her attention." At the time, I'd felt flattered that he saw me as important in my daughter's life. And I'd even felt sorry for him. Now I understand that he was beginning the process of isolating Carmen from me, planting seeds of doubt about whether our closeness was healthy. A husband shouldn't have to compete with his wife's mother, he'd continued. Carmen needs to learn to prioritize her marriage. I'd actually agreed with him at the time, and I'd started calling Carmen less frequently and declining some of her invitations to family events. I thought I was being respectful of their marriage, but I was actually enabling Derek's abuse by participating in Carmen's isolation. This is one of the most insidious aspects of financial and emotional abuse, the way it turns victims' own instincts and values against them. I wanted to be a good mother-in-law, so Derek convinced me that being a good mother-in-law meant stepping back from my relationship with my daughter. Carmen wanted to be a good wife, so Derek convinced her that being a good wife meant choosing him over everyone else in her life, including me. Neither of us realized we were being manipulated because Derek's requests seemed reasonable on the surface. Of course, a new husband deserves his wife's primary loyalty. Of course, a mother should respect her daughter's marriage by not being too intrusive. But healthy relationships don't require you to choose between the people you love. James has never asked Carmen to prioritize their marriage over our relationship because he understands that our bond makes Carmen stronger, not weaker. I love that you and Elena are so close, he told Carmen when they were engaged. It shows me what kind of mother you'll be to our children, and it gives me a model for the kind of family I want us to create. This is what healthy love looks like. It multiplies rather than subtracts, creates abundance rather than scarcity, builds bridges rather than walls. As I finish telling this story, I want to emphasize that our victory over Derek wasn't just about exposing one evil man or saving ourselves from one particular threat. It was about reclaiming our power to define our own worth and protect what matters most to us. Derek wanted us to believe that we were weak, foolish, and expendable. Society often reinforces these messages, telling older women that we're burdens, telling victims of abuse that we should have known better, telling people without college degrees or professional credentials that our insights don't matter. But Carmen and I proved that courage and love can triumph over manipulation and greed. We proved that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when the stakes are high enough. We proved that you don't need to be young or educated or wealthy to be a hero. Most importantly, we proved that family bonds, when they're based on genuine love and mutual respect, are stronger than any force that tries to break them. Derek spent months trying to destroy the relationship between Carmen and me. But instead of weakening us, his attacks made us stronger. Instead of isolating us from each other, his manipulation brought us closer together. Instead of making us doubt ourselves, his abuse taught us to trust our instincts. His greatest weakness was his inability to understand what he was dealing with, the fierce, protective love between a mother and daughter who had already survived abandonment, poverty, and countless smaller challenges together. That love was our superpower, and Derek never stood a chance against it. Today, as I watch Carmen thrive in her marriage to James, excel in her studies, and find purpose in helping other survivors, I know that every sacrifice I made for her was worth it. Not because she owes me anything, she doesn't, but because she's living the life she deserves, free from fear and full of possibility. And as I continue my own journey at 75, working part-time, helping my neighbors, sharing our story, and enjoying my role as an honorary grandmother to Sophia and Miguel, I know that my life has meaning and purpose that extends far beyond what Derek tried to reduce me to. I am not just a cleaning lady from Queens. I am not just an elderly immigrant with limited assets. I am not just someone to be exploited and discarded. I am Elena Rodriguez, and I am a survivor, a mother, a fighter, and a protector of those who need protection. My story matters, my voice matters, and my life matters. And so do yours, no matter who has tried to convince you otherwise. Thank you for listening to our story. Thank you for caring about what happened to us and what we learned from it. And thank you for being part of the community that makes sharing these difficult truths worthwhile. Remember, you are stronger than you know, wiser than your enemies believe, and deserving of love that lifts you up instead of tearing you down. Never let anyone convince you otherwise.